Welcome back to Hot Air with me, Joshua Robert. This is part 2 of our 2-part series on expectations. And if you listened to the last episode, you already know where we left off. If you haven't, you should probably go listen to it first because we are going to continue forging ahead in this series of expectations and get into some tools. We did talk about the pattern, the frustration, the cycle of trying to communicate your needs to people who just are not meeting you there. That was episode 1. Now, we're shifting into what actually changes things. This episode is about the turning point. It's about the moment where you stop trying to force a different outcome and you start seeing people as they really are. We're getting into the concept that completely changed the way that I approach relationships, the tools that help you move forward without overthinking everything, and what it actually feels like on the other side of all of this. So if you've ever felt stuck between knowing something isn't working and not knowing what to do next, this is where that starts to make sense. Well, hopefully. And before we get into it, make sure you're following me on Instagram and TikTok at _hotairpod for more content and clips and stories from the show. And you can visit hotairwithjoshuarobert.com to shop my merch, submit your listener stories, and send in your topic suggestions for future episodes. So, as I said in the first episode, grab a little journal or a notepad. If you did grab one, go grab it again because you may want to still take some notes. We're going to pick up right where we left off. So let's hit it. Part 4, Radical Acceptance. This is the part where everything starts to shift, and not in that cinematic way. There's no big confrontation, no perfectly timed realization where everything suddenly makes sense and all your emotions neatly fall into place. It's quieter, it's subtle, it's kind of underwhelming, honestly. And if you're not paying attention, you might miss it entirely. For me, the shift started in therapy, which feels obviously very on brand. Duh. I was sitting there going over the same frustrations, the same patterns, I've already talked to them about this multiple times and nothing is changing, like that whole narrative. At this point, I was still very much focused on the other person, what they were doing, what they weren't doing, how they could do better, how I could get them to understand. The entire conversation was centered around them. At some point, my therapist introduced the concept of radical acceptance. And at first, it sounds like one of those phrases that gets thrown around a lot, but doesn't really mean anything in practice. It almost feels like a softer way of saying, just deal with it, or something that people are going to print on a fucking t-shirt, which I was not interested in hearing. There was resistance right away. The idea of accepting something that was actively frustrating or hurting me did not feel empowering. It really felt like settling. And my friends had been telling me about this previously. One of my best friends, Natalie, would always be like, you just have to accept people for what they are. They're never going to do what you want them to do. And I was like, so I'm just supposed to lower my expectations, lower the bar, just let them treat me poorly. But that's not what that radical acceptance or just acceptance really means. So I felt like I was settling, but that initial reaction is very important because it highlights that common misunderstanding. Acceptance does not mean approval. It does not mean that you're okay with what's happening. It does not mean that you agree with how someone is treating you. It simply means acknowledging reality as it is without trying to argue with it or reshape it or pretend that it could be something else. That is very important, and that distinction really changed everything. Up until that point, I had been operating under the assumption that if something wasn't working, the goal was to fix it. I think a lot of us function that way. If someone wasn't meeting my needs, the goal was to get them to meet my needs. There was always a sense that something could be adjusted, improved, or resolved through effort and communication. Radical acceptance challenged that completely. It introduced the idea that sometimes the situation is exactly what it appears to be, and no amount of effort is going to change that. Sitting with that, good God, uncomfortable. It requires you to let go of control in a way that feels so unnatural, especially if you're used to being proactive and communicative and solution oriented. It asks you to stop trying to influence an outcome and instead just observe it honestly. And that's where the real work begins because it would be great if it ended there. Woo, radical acceptance, but there's way more to it. Looking at someone as they are, not as they could be or as you wish they were, requires a level of honesty that feels almost harsh at first. It means paying attention to patterns, not promises. It means valuing consistency over intention. It means acknowledging that who someone is on a daily basis matters more than who they are in small, isolated moments. That's where the concept of right now becomes important. Radical acceptance is not about predicting the future or deciding that someone will never change. It's about recognizing who they are right now in this current moment based on their current behavior. That clarity removes a lot of the confusion that comes from focusing on potential. Potential is seductive, potential is hot. It allows you to imagine a different version of reality and one where everything aligns and the relationship functions the way you want it to be. That version might not be entirely unrealistic, but it's not what you are currently experiencing. Radical acceptance brings you back to what is actually happening, not what could happen. Once that shift starts to take place and you absorb it, something interesting happens internally. The constant mental negotiation begins to quiet down. There's less analyzing, less overthinking, less imaginary conversations with yourself, less trying to decode someone else's behavior. The situation becomes simpler, if not a little bit easier. And instead of asking, how do I get them to understand me? The question becomes, what are they consistently showing me? That question has a much clearer answer, and it's usually one that has been there all along. That answer has not changed. There's a moment where it clicks in a very grounded, practical way. It's not emotional, it's not observational. You just start to notice patterns without immediately reacting to them. You see the same behavior play out, but instead of feeling surprised by that behavior or frustrated, there's just a sense of recognition. That recognition is where acceptance starts to take root. Being surprised by the patterns is wild. You shouldn't be surprised by someone not returning your call when they've never returned your call. Now, it doesn't erase the disappointment. It doesn't suddenly make everything feel okay. What it does is remove the element of shock and confusion. The situation stops feeling unpredictable. It becomes something that you understand, even if you don't like it. That understanding creates space. Without the constant push to change the situation, your energy is no longer being directed outward. It starts to come back to you. That shift in focus is subtle but powerful. Instead of investing energy into trying to change someone else, you begin to consider your own role in the dynamic, not from a place of blame, but from a place of awareness. You start to ask different questions. What am I expecting from this person? Are those expectations aligned with what they have consistently shown me? And if not, why am I still holding on to them? And why am I still asking them to do something different? Those questions lead to a deeper realization, which is that a lot of the frustration wasn't just coming from the other person's behavior. It was coming from the gap between what was happening and what I expected or wanted to happen. Closing that gap doesn't require changing the other person. It requires adjusting your expectation. And that adjustment can feel like a loss at first. It can feel like you're giving up, like you're lowering the bar, or you're settling for less than you think that you deserve. And in reality, it's more accurate to say that you're aligning your expectations with reality. You're no longer asking for something that hasn't ever been offered to you. There is a certain kind of relief that comes with that alignment. It's definitely subtle but noticeable. The tension starts to ease. The constant cycle of hope and disappointment begins to slow down. There's less emotional whiplash, less back and forth between this could work and this isn't working, and everything becomes a little bit more steady, far less roller coaster ride-ish. That steadiness creates a foundation for the next phase, which is where you start to make decisions based on this new understanding. Acceptance is not the final step. It's the turning point. It's what allows you to move forward in a way that is grounded in reality instead of driven by hope and fantasy alone. And this is also where personal responsibility comes into the picture in a more meaningful way. Accepting someone as they are doesn't mean you have to keep engaging with them in the same way. It simply means you're no longer expecting them to be different. What you choose to do with that information is where your power lies. That's the part that initially felt counterintuitive. Letting go of control over someone else's behavior felt like losing power. In practice, it turned out to be the opposite. Releasing that control freed up energy that had been tied up in trying to manage something that was never mine to manage in the first place. It's not your responsibility to manage others. That energy could be redirected towards something more useful, like this podcast, which is figuring out how I wanted to show up and move forward. What boundaries needed to be adjusted. I figured out what expectations needed to shift, what role this person realistically played in my life instead of the role I wanted them to play. And those answers didn't come all at once. They developed over a long time, over a year. As the acceptance became more integrated, they developed. Each interaction became a little easier to navigate, not because the other person had changed, because they haven't at all. Really, none of them have, but because my expectations were no longer misaligned with reality and what those people are capable of doing. That shift laid the groundwork for something that felt very different from where this all started. It created the possibility of interacting with people without the constant underlying frustration. It made room for a different kind of clarity, one that wasn't dependent on someone else's behavior. For a long time, I couldn't even talk to the people that were frustrating me the most because there was that underlying frustration because I was still hopeful. I still had hope that they would change. So I didn't talk. I didn't FaceTime. I didn't call. I barely even text. Very rarely, like months would go by because I was like, how can I have a normal conversation when I'm wanting them to be different? And it felt not genuine. It felt like I was being fake if I wasn't talking about those deeper rooted things, which is why I stopped talking to people, a lot of people, for a very long time. And it wasn't until I started letting go of that control, noticing the patterns, analyzing the data, realizing that I needed to live in reality and lower that bar and lower those expectations I was able to finally be like, okay, I can have a little bit of a normal conversation, but like you got to get to that point where you're not misaligned with reality. And from that place, the next step becomes a lot more practical. It's no longer about understanding the concept, it's about applying it. It's about figuring out what this looks like in real life, in actual relationships, in day to day interactions. Like once you've kind of got over that hump and that speed bump and that roller coaster ride has slowed down, like where do you go? Right? That is where the tools come in. Because once you see things clearly, the question naturally becomes what to do with that clarity. The hell do I do with it? And obviously, that's exactly where we're going to go next. Part 5, how to move forward. So once you reach a place where you can see things clearly, where you're no longer arguing with reality and you're starting to accept people as they are, the next question becomes pretty straightforward. What do you actually do with that information? Awareness on its own is helpful, but it doesn't automatically change your behavior. There's still a gap between understanding something intellectually and living it out in your day to day interactions. This is where tools come in, not in a rigid self help checklist kind of way, but in a way that helps you move differently without overthinking every step. The goal here is not to become detached or cold or to cut everyone off the second they don't meet your expectations. I already did that. So, like, take my notes here, okay? The goal is to interact with people in a way that protects your energy and aligns with what you now know to be true. The first shift starts with looking at the data in a more honest way. And this sounds simple, but it's something most people don't actually do. There is a tendency to focus on isolated moments, the times when people did show up, the moments that felt good, the moments that gave you hope. Those moments stand out because they're emotionally charged, but they don't necessarily represent the full picture. So looking at the data means zooming out. It means asking yourself, what this person has consistently shown you over time, not what they're capable of on a good day. It requires you to be a little bit more objective, almost like you're observing the relationship from the outside instead of being fully immersed in it. When you do that, the patterns become much more obvious. You start to notice what is actually reliable versus what is occasional. You see where the effort is consistent and where it drops off. You see what you can depend on and what you can't depend on. That clarity is very important. It gives you a realistic foundation to work from. And without it, you're still operating in assumptions of hope. Once you have that clarity, the next step is adjusting your expectations accordingly. This is where people tend to resist because it can feel like you're lowering your standards. I felt it. In reality, it's about redirecting your standards. Your standards don't really change, but where you apply them does. Instead of expecting every person in your life to meet your every need, you start to recognize that different people play different roles. Some people are capable of depth and emotional support. Some people are great for lightness and fun. Some people are consistent in practical ways, but not emotionally available. And when you accept those distinctions, you stop expecting one person to be everything because no one person is going to be everything. This shift removes a lot of unnecessary disappointment. If you know someone isn't emotionally available, you stop going to them for emotional support. That doesn't mean you cut them off or that the relationship has no value. It just means you engage with them in a way that aligns with what they can actually offer. That idea can be summed up very simply, but it's surprisingly impactful. You stop going to a place that doesn't have what you're looking for. Expecting someone to suddenly provide something that they've never ever shown you that they can provide is setting you up for frustration. Adjusting that expectation allows you to interact with them without that underlying resentment or tension. Another important part of the process is allowing yourself to grieve a bit. Sounds dramatic, but stick with me. This often gets overlooked. It doesn't feel as tangible as setting a boundary or changing a behavior, but it is a very important step. You're not just adjusting expectations, you're letting go of a version of the relationship that you really wanted to exist. And there's a difference between accepting someone as they are and not feeling anything about it. Acceptance does not eliminate emotion. It just changes how you relate to it. There can still be disappointment and sadness and frustration. The difference is that those emotions are no longer tied to an ongoing expectation that things will change. That expectation is what allows you to move forward without carrying that weight. It's an internal process. It doesn't always happen all at once. It might show up in small moments when you realize you're no longer expecting something that you used to hope for. It might feel like really subtle, but it is a significant feeling. Another tool that becomes important is reassigning roles within your relationship. This builds directly on the idea of adjusting expectations, but it's far more specific. It's about consciously deciding what role someone realistically plays in your life based on their behavior, not your ideal version of them. This can be as simple as recognizing that someone is a great friend to go out with and have fun with, but not someone you go to for those deeper conversations. It can mean understanding that a family member is someone you keep things surface level with because deeper interactions tend to lead to frustration. These adjustments are not punishments, they are alignments. Making these distinctions allows you to preserve parts of the relationships that do work without constantly pushing for the parts that don't. It creates a sense of balance that was not there before because when you're no longer trying to force the relationship into a shape it doesn't naturally take, then the frustration just naturally goes away. Boundaries, hello, my fave, also come into play here, but not always in the way that people think. There's a common idea that boundaries need to be announced and explained and agreed upon in order to be valid. In reality, many boundaries are simply changes in your behavior. You don't always need to sit someone down and declare a boundary for it to exist. I don't do that anymore. Sometimes it's as simple as not engaging in the same way that you used to. It's choosing not to have certain conversations, not to share certain information, not to rely on someone for things that they have shown you that they cannot handle. These shifts can be quiet, but they are effective. They allow you to protect your energy without turning every change into a confrontation. In some cases, a direct conversation is necessary, especially if the dynamic is more involved, like a romantic relationship. But in many situations, changing your own behavior is enough to completely shift the dynamic overall. Another tool is redirecting your needs to the right places. Letting go of the expectation that one person will meet a specific need creates space to find that need fulfilled elsewhere. These tools are very similar, but they're different ways of going at them. So, this might mean leaning more into relationships that are already aligned with you, or it might mean building new ones. It also means being honest with yourself about what you actually need rather than minimizing it to make a situation more comfortable. When you stop trying to force the wrong people to meet your needs, you free yourself up to seek out environments and relationships and people where those needs are naturally met. It's hard to let go of people, but this is also where things start to feel lighter. The energy that was previously spent trying to change someone else becomes available for something else entirely. It can be redirected into relationships that feel more reciprocal, into personal growth, into things that actually add value instead of draining it. It's like if you're holding on to your ex, they're holding a space of your energy, and you're not going to find a new romantic partner until you've let go of that. You have to make space for things that fit with you and let go of the things that don't fit with you that are taking up space already unnecessarily. And like none of these tools are about cutting people off or making dramatic decisions overnight, right? I did that. And that's not what these tools are about. They're about small, consistent shifts in how you engage. And if you want to cut people off, go for it, right? Like there's some people that you don't need. You simply do not need them. But you're only forced to be with them because perhaps they're family or you went to high school with them and you've been friends for 20 some odd years, depending on how old you are, aging myself here. But you don't owe anyone anything. If they no longer fit in any capacity, then like, bye bye, they have to go. And like over time, these tools and these shifts, they add up. They change the way that you experience your relationships, not because the other person has changed, because they haven't, but because you are no longer approaching them from a place of misaligned expectations. And that, friends, is like relief central. That is where relief comes in. You're no longer stuck in the cycle of hope and disappointment. You are operating from a place of clarity and you know what to expect. You know what not to expect. And you're no longer trying to force something that is never going to happen. From there, something else starts to emerge. It's a long list of from theirs, isn't it? There's a lot to this cycle. Something that feels very different from where this started. And it's not just clarity. It is what I started talking about at the very beginning of episode 1, the sense of peace that comes from no longer being in constant resistance to what is. And that's where this all leads. Because once you stop fighting reality and start moving in alignment with it, your emotional experience shifts in a way that's hard to fully understand until you are in it. So we are going to part 6, which is the peace. There is a very specific kind of peace that shows up once all of this starts to settle in. And that settling does take a lot of time, okay? It's not the kind of peace that I thought I was working toward in the beginning. It's not this big euphoric feeling where everything suddenly feels perfect and healed and aligned. It's far more grounded, quieter, steadier, and honestly, like a little surprising, like when you first notice it, when you're like, oh, wait, I haven't thought about that in a while. Oh, my road rage almost doesn't exist anymore because I'm not having imaginary conversations with people that are never going to meet my expectations. What stands out the most is what's no longer there. The constant tension, the overthinking, the emotional buildup before interactions, the replaying of conversations before and after, all of that starts to fade. Not all at once, but gradually. You start to notice that situations that used to take up a lot of your mental space and emotional space, they just don't anymore. It's like, where did they go? There was a time when certain behaviors would immediately trigger me, like so bad. I would feel it in my body, the spike of frustration and disappointment, followed by like that internal dialogue where I'm trying to make sense of it all. I would go back and forth, trying to decide if it was even worth bringing up again or trying to figure out how to say it in a way that would finally land. That whole process was like automatic. I had trained my brain to do it. Now, it almost doesn't even start. And it's fucking great. The behavior from other people still happens. I still notice it. Instead of spiraling or analyzing or getting frustrated, I just recognize it. And honestly, something happened the other day and all I did was laugh. It was the same expected behavior that normally would trigger me, that would make me be like, what the actual fuck? And I would previous me a year and a half-ish ago would have went off and I laughed. I just couldn't help but laugh because I was like, yeah, probably could have seen that coming. It's like neutral. It's not numb or disconnected. It's just neutral. I'm like, this is exactly what I expected to happen. And this was great because it no longer means that I am attached to a different outcome. The emotional charge that used to come from unmet expectations isn't there because the expectation itself has changed. And at first, that can feel a little weird. Like, wait, shouldn't I be like flipping out right now? There's a part of you or me that might even question it if it's legit. You might think, like, should I be more upset about this? Should I be throwing plates across the room? Should I be more bothered? Like, there can be a moment where you're not used to that lack of reaction because for so long, those reactions felt like proof that you even cared at all. And what I've started to realize is that caring doesn't have to look like constant emotional engagement. It doesn't have to involve frustration or disappointment to be valid. In many ways, the absence of those intense reactions is a sign that you've actually processed something more fully. Another noticeable shift is the way interactions feel in real time. There's less pressure, less underlying expectation, less need for things to go a certain way. You're able to be present in the interaction without mentally tracking whether or not the other person is meeting your needs in all of those moments. There's no like under the surface weirdness happening. That doesn't mean that you ignore what's happening. It just means you're not attaching a story to it. You're not interpreting every action as a sign of something bigger. You're just seeing it for what it is in the moment without layering it with expectation. That's where that lightness and that peace comes in and feels great. Interactions that used to feel heavy or loaded are simpler. They're less emotional. You're not trying to like extract something from them that is not naturally there. You're engaging with what is, not what you wish it could be. And that simplicity creates a lot of space for something that's unexpected, which is humor, which is why I laugh now. There's a point where the predictability of certain patterns becomes fucking funny, not in a sarcastic or bitter way. Like it's actually funny. Like you can't help but laugh. It's funny in an observational way. You start to see the consistency in people's behavior. And instead of being frustrated, you recognize it and you just go, old me would have wanted something different, but old me was silly, right? It's funny. You might catch yourself thinking like, yeah, of course they responded that way, or of course that happened. And that's exactly how this always goes. Like there's this ease of that recognition because it's no longer tied to being like disappointed. It's just familiar because when you were pissed off, things were the same. And now that you're laughing at it, things are still the same. The familiarity removes the element of surprise, which is often what amplifies those emotional reactions. When someone is predictable, it loses its ability to disrupt you in the same way, but they only become predictable when you stop trying to make them do something else. This is that emotional shift. And things become very, very clear. Nothing about the other person has changed. Their behavior is the same. Their patterns are the same. The way they show up is the same. The difference is entirely you internally. You're no longer expecting them to be different. So their behavior no longer feels like a letdown. That realization, like surreal, weird, uncomfy at first. It challenges the idea that your peace is dependent on other people changing. For a long time, it might have felt like things would only get better if they improved, if they communicated differently, if they showed up more consistently. And now you see that your experience can change even if they don't do any of that. And that right there is freedom. That's where the freedom comes in. You are no longer waiting for someone else to do something in order for you to feel okay. You're not tied to their behavior in the same way. Your emotional state is not being dictated by whether or not they meet an expectation that you've already recognized as unrealistic. It's not about detaching from people entirely or not caring at all. It's about being grounded in what is real rather than being pulled back and forth by what you wish would happen. And what's interesting is this also changes the way that you move through other relationships, new and old, more broadly here. There's more clarity in how you engage with different people. You're more intentional about where you invest your energy. You're more aware of what feels reciprocal and what doesn't. You're more open to meeting new people that might meet your different needs in different ways. That awareness, again, is not always about like cutting people off or making big decisions. It's just about spending less time in situations that feel draining and finding more time for ones that are aligned with you. Over time, all of this creates a completely different experience in all your relationships. They feel more balanced, not because every single person is meeting every single need, but because you're not expecting them to. You're engaging with different relationships in different ways for different reasons. You might start to make new connections that are more aligned with where you are now. When you stop investing in those people that you're trying to change, you got way more capacity to recognize potential great relationships and build relationships that feel more natural, that aren't just rooted in time, that, or rooted in the fact that you share blood. There's a lot of confidence that comes with that, not outward performative confidence, but quiet internal sense of just like knowing. You're just like, okay, I know what I need. I know what works for me. I know what doesn't work for me. And I am willing to compromise on some things and not feel depleted when people don't meet my needs. Like, whoop-de fucking do. I'll figure it out. You also start to like accept things about yourself a little bit more. You're no longer questioning whether your needs are being met or whether you're asking for the wrong things. You've seen what happens when those things are not met. You stop questioning whether your needs are valid and whether you should even be asking for those things or whether you deserve those things. You just go find them elsewhere. That clarity reinforces the understanding that your needs are important and they are valid. The issue was never that you were asking for too much. It was that you were asking someone who simply could not provide it. That's going to take away your self-doubt. That self-doubt builds up over time, but realizing that you're allowed to ask for whatever the fuck it is that you want. Some people just can't give it to you, and that's fine. Like, get rid of that self-doubt. Instead of internalizing someone else's limitations as a reflection of your worth, you are able to see them as separate. Their inability to meet your needs is not a statement about you. It's a reflection of where they are. This allows you to maintain your sense of self without constantly adjusting it based on someone else's behavior. All of this adds up to a different kind of emotional baseline. Things feel steady, less fluctuation between high hope and deep frustration, less intensity in situations that used to feel very overwhelming. There's consistency in how you experience your relationships, even if the relationships themselves haven't changed. And I mean, haven't changed as in the person hasn't changed that much, but your relationship has, the dynamic will change a bit. And this isn't about everything being perfect. It's not about not being in constant conflict with reality. It's about moving through your life without that underlying friction that comes from expecting things to be what they never will be. So listen, once you experience that, it becomes very clear why trying to force people to change was never the solution. The solution was never out there. It was here in the shift, in this acceptance, in the willingness to see things clearly and adjust accordingly. That is what creates the peace. And once you have it, that peace, you don't really want to go back. No, no, thank you. At the end of all of this, the biggest shift is realizing that your peace was never dependent on someone else changing. Your peace comes from seeing people clearly, accepting that they've consistently shown you, and choosing to move in a way that aligns with that reality. It's not about lowering your standards or caring less. It's about placing your energy where it's actually going to be met. Again, you're not asking for too much. And frankly, you never were. You were just asking the wrong person. When that clicks, everything feels lighter. The overthinking quiets down, your frustrations, they fade, and you start to move through your relationships with a level of clarity that makes everything else easier. And perhaps you were the one that could offer yourself what you needed all along. And I would also just like to say, because this these two episodes were very important to me in the sense that like these are real things that I've experienced that almost my entire therapy journey has really been about. And there are some relationships, while I've kind of lowered my standards back to reality, there are some relationships that I no longer have. that I have let go of. And I am okay with that because when my bar was lowered and that bar was just at the level of general basic respect and I wasn't receiving that, then no, you no longer have a place in my life. That is my boundary. But when I lowered my bar and realized, okay, well, some of these people are not going to be able to meet or match the expectations that I have, but I know that they still have the ability to respect me, then like, okay, I can maybe nurture that relationship. It will become something different. Every relationship, every single solitary one, all of my friendships, all of my relationships with my family, romantic relationships, are completely different after this last year and a half of therapy. So expecting that peace and for things to feel the same, for me anyway, that's not really the way it goes. That peace that I found within myself also resulted in every dynamic and relationship feeling different. Sometimes in, ways that don't feel great, sometimes in ways that do feel great. Sometimes those relationships no longer exist. Sometimes those relationships feel a little bit watered down. Sometimes those relationships feel amazing and better and the communication is wonderful. There's a lot of change that happens when you're on that journey to find peace. So just don't expect for it to happen overnight. I think sit down, look at your relationships, see what you need from certain people, look at the data. Are they able to give you that? Maybe person A won't be able to give you what person B will, but person C can. And then you start to decide how you want to communicate that. You set the boundaries for yourself. Maybe you start calling less. Maybe you do try to open up and you haven't tried to have those important conversations yet. Give them an opportunity to change, but don't keep giving them opportunity over opportunity or opportunity after opportunity after opportunity because people will show you exactly who they are. And trust them when they show you who they are. You are more important. Your peace is more important than trying to make people meet you where you wish that they would be when they simply can't. If he wanted to, he would. That's not true. If he wanted to, maybe he does, but he's just not fucking capable. So, if this episode resonated with you, make sure you're following me on Instagram and TikTok at _hotairpod and head over to my website, hotairwithjoshuarobert.com to shop my merch, submit your listener stories, and send in your topic suggestions. And share this episode with somebody who you think maybe could either use the reminder that they need to, maybe let go, move along, stop trying to change people, or perhaps there's somebody, this might be your last ditch effort where you're like, I've tried to communicate this with you and you're wondering why I'm cutting you off. Maybe send this to them too, and they might get the hint. So thank you for being here. Thanks for listening to Hot Air. Thank you for, keeping my downloads going up every month. I'm like so excited that I keep looking at the analytics and we just keep growing. It's such a great feeling. So I really do appreciate everyone sticking with me on this wild year and a bit journey. So stay peaceful, stay having your strong expectations and wanting great things out of your relationships, but also stay knowing who's going to be able to give you those things and who just isn't. And I will see you next Tuesday.